Okay, folks, well, welcome. My name is Bob Flynn. I'm an instructor here at Palo Alto Networks. Uh, Thanks for joining the webinar. We are going to be talking about improving your GlobalProtect deployment today. We're going to go through quite a few topics. At the end of the presentation, I'll be happy to take questions. There's a Q&A function there. You can ask your questions and things like that. I'll be responding at the end, however. I won't be responding as they come in. But if you have any questions as we go, please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask them, and we'll be happy to answer them at the end. So as I mentioned today, we're going to be talking about best practices or improving your GlobalProtect deployment through Prisma Access, what we call the mobile user solution. We're going to run through mobile user authentication, the whole configuration and deployment process with some best practices there. We'll talk about the portals and mobile user processing nodes, the MUSBNs, similar to the GlobalProtect gateways with a physical deployment, and some troubleshooting and making sure everything's going okay. And then we're going to have a little section about host information profiles and creating security policy rules using host information. So let's dig in. But first of all, there are a few things that you're going to need, licensing and things like that, in order to deploy the mobile user solution with Prisma Access. There are licenses for mobile users. There are some just for remote network users, some just for mobile users, and some for everything. You'll need your Cortex Data Lake subscription. If users need to reach back to a corporate data center, maybe to an authentication server or a DNS server or some other service that they might need, then you may need to deploy, you would need to deploy corporate access nodes down a service connection. Now, these are going to be available for the mobile user solutions, whether it's the enterprise edition that you're doing or the zero trust network architecture, which are both licensed for mobile users. Next thing you want to think about is authentication for your users. We support all the different authentication options that are available on a normal on-premise firewall, on a Palo Alto Networks next generation firewall, including things like the local authentication database, so authenticating locally to a list on the device. And we're actually going to talk about that a little bit today. Radius authentication, TACX Plus, LDAP, multi-factor, Kerberos, SAML, all the different ways that you are used to leveraging authentication, we can do that here too. One of the tips or pointers when you're deploying your mobile user solution is to actually leverage a local user database for the test user. This is going to help you if you do need to troubleshoot your deployment to determine whether it's a problem with the deployment of your nodes, your portal or your mobile user SPNs, versus a problem reaching an authentication server or something like that. So what we've done here is we've used the local user database, which you find under the device tab in your templates. We are looking at our mobile user template here, and we're going to the local user database and just creating a test user. We can use this to validate that our mobile user solution is up and running. Then we can start leveraging our authentication profiles for remote authentication. Great way to be able to pinpoint where a problem is, if there is a problem. You're going to need a server profile for remote authentication. Here we got an LDAP server profile for for an LDAP server. You would put in information as to where the server is. There could be more than one server. Things like the base DN, passwords, bind DN, that sort of thing. There's a place to choose the type of LDAP server. There's Active Directory or a few other different options. And that server profile gets added to an authentication profile. You find that again under your mobile user template. Under the device tab, you have your authentication profile. The authentication profile basically says who authenticates using what method, and then ties the server back to the authentication profile. So we created that corporate AD server in the last slide, and here it is. Here's part of our server profile. We're doing LDAP authentication. We have the ability to have multiple factors here. And under the advanced tab, we have the ability to choose who authenticates using these different methods. You could have multiple different authentication profiles. You could even tie multiple ones together in an authentication sequence. If we're doing multi-factor authentication, that's where we would use that factors tab. Deploying the mobile users, this is through Panorama that we're going to look at. You would go into your Panorama tab to your cloud services configuration. And across the top, there is the ability to do a service setup, mobile users, remote networks, service connections, etc. We're going to click on mobile users. The page pops up and it has this gray opaque overlay on it. It gives you some help text there. Basically says, what we're going to do is in step 1, create a template stack and select a parent device group. In step 2, we're going to map some zones. And then step 3, we're going to add our GlobalProtect portal. So you click to close that, or if you never want to see it again, don't show it again. And you'll do the first thing it did. It pointed us at that gearbox. For step 1, we'll do that. We will automatically create templates for our mobile users. If we need to tie in existing templates that might be used already, we can add those to that template stack. We will choose a parent device group that, in other words, the device group that'll be on top of this mobile device group, which is probably the shared group. In this particular case, somebody has built a level for Palo Alto Networks security best practices, and we want to go in underneath those so that we inherit those rules in that device group. But in many cases, the shared device group would be the one we'd fall below. So in other words, this can all be customized as you need it to be, or you can use the default values. The next step is to map zones. So if you have existing security policy rules that you want to use, like we did in this PA security best practices device group, it's going to have security policy rules with security zone names in them. And we need to map those to either be part of the untrusted zones, which are outside of Prisma Access, or trusted zones, which are part of Prisma Access. If you don't have any rules that you're inheriting that already have security policy I mean, that already have security zone names in them. You are going to need at least 2 security zones. You'll have to go into the network tab to create. We did that here. We created 2 zones. We called one internet and one Prisma access. We said, well, the Prisma access is going to be on our trusted side, and the internet's going to be on the untrusted side. The next step was the step number 3 in that overlay, where it said, okay, now configure the portal. So we're going to do that. You click to add a portal. You are going to give it a name, a host name. We have our own domain that customers can use, gpcloudservice.com, or they may own their own domain and they can use their own company domain. There's a little radio button up there at the top, use default domain, use company domain. The authentication profile that we created would be added to the client authentication. And it might be necessary to do internal host detection. If your customer is an existing Palo Alto Networks customer and they use GlobalProtect with on-prem or customer-owned firewalls already, they may use it inside of their networks, inside of their offices, inside of their branches or large headquarters as a user ID feature. In which case, you would use the GlobalProtect client as a mobile user when you're outside of the office. When you're inside of the office, it would sense you're inside of the office and say, okay, well, you don't need to connect to an IPsec tunnel, but go ahead and authenticate. This is our internal host detection. The idea is you would put in a host name of something inside that cannot be reached from the internet, that cannot be reached outside. Like here, maybe a internal host with an internal IP address. The GlobalProtect client will try to do reverse resolution to see if they can resolve that IP address to that client, a prisma-access.lab. If they fail, then the client there that's loaded onto your device or the customer's device says, oh, I'm outside, so I need to establish an IPsec tunnel. Go to a portal and go through the whole process. We're going to talk about that connection process here in a moment. So my point here was that the internal host detection would only really be used typically with your legacy customers. With a new customer that's first deploying this, they probably don't need that. So the next tab across the top, and we're going to go through these different ones, is locations. You'll click on the region, or perhaps your the customer has a global license in multiple regions, but they'll click region by region. They'll choose different locations. It's certainly a good idea to choose at least 2 locations. You want these locations to be close to where the user base is. There's even the ability to choose all locations. Customers not being charged or paying by location. So, if they have users on the East Coast and West Coast, maybe their model looks something like the picture up here. But if they have, users centrally located in the United States, if they have some users up on the East Coast and West Coast of Canada, users down in Mexico, etc., they want to choose these locations close to where their user base is, because we are going to spin up our MU-SPNs, our mobile user SPNs, in these locations. And for the best performance, you want these cloud security processing nodes, these cloud gateways, to be as close to your customers, to your users as possible. Alternatively, if you don't like the map view, you can just have a manual list, or a written list, I should say. The next tab, IP pools. So if you think about connecting to Wi-Fi at the office or even at home, you'll be given an IP address, and that IP address comes from a pool that router or that access point has. They're going to hand you an address from that pool. Well, we need to do the same thing with Prisma Access for mobile users. We need to have a pool of IP addresses, a group of IP addresses that we can hand out to our users. Has to be of sufficient size to handle all the users, plus, maybe 3 or 4 times that size, just to be safe. Because I could be connected to GlobalProtect or to Prisma Access for mobile users with my workstation and my laptop and my tablet and my phone. Well, there I am. I'm using 4 different addresses. As far as licensing or Prisma Access for mobile user, I just count as one user because it all authenticates back to me, to Bob, but I'm using 4 different IP addresses. So I need a pool that's going to be of sufficient size. The smallest pool size we will allow you to do is a /23, which is basically a 2 Class Cs. You can always go bigger. Their internal IP addresses, the non-routable IP addresses, it's not like they cost you money. Go as big as you need to, plus a bit more, just to be safe. Under the Network Services tab, primarily you'll be looking at DNS. So if there are internal DNS servers for internal sites that are going to be resolving to internal addresses, you'll want to list the different internal domains here versus, so we will use internal DNS servers. We go down that service connection to that corporate access node, down to that data center where that DNS server is to get requests, versus what we need to send out to public domains to do public resolution. If you're going to google.com or whatever. We do support WINS. Also, you could configure that if required. The mobile user solution uses the idea of portals and MU, or mobile user SPNs, security processing nodes. Security processing nodes are called security processing nodes because they do the security processing. This is where we are inspecting things using PanOS for security policy rules for allows and denies, for content and inspection and threat protection, and we can do decryption, we can do wildfire, we can do all those things that you are used to doing with a firewall, we can do with these security processing nodes. The architecture of the Prisma Access mobile user solution is the same, or the pieces and parts are the same as they are for traditional GlobalProtect. But if you're not familiar with that, we'll kind of go through it. There's really 3 pieces. There's a portal, there's the MUSPNs. If we were talking about on-premise firewalls, we'd call them GlobalProtect gateways. And there's the software. So there's a thin client, a client that loads onto devices for Windows and Macs, for mobile devices like Androids and iOS, There's one for Linux. Uh, the ones for Windows and Macs can be hosted on the portal in Prism Access, and people can actually browse to the portal, download the software onto their device if it's a Windows device or a Mac. For iOS and Android, Chromebook, you find those on Google Play for Android and Chromebook, and then for iOS for mobile, you go to the App Store for Apple. For the Linux app, you download it from our website, our customer support portal, and then you can load it on your Linux device. The connection process here is basically the device as a GlobalProtect client will initially connect to the portal, the Prism Access portal. The portal performs a lot of functions. Its basic function is to push settings. Well, two things. One, to authenticate the user, and then second, to push settings to the user. And these settings can be refreshed anytime anybody connects to the portal. The sort of settings it would send are, say, a list of security processing nodes that are available in different locations. The rules about whether you can disconnect on demand or not. Maybe you're always logged on. What information, host information, needs to be presented when you connect to the portal, because we're going to talk about those host information profiles. Different settings such as that. So I like to think of the portal as sort of the traffic cop. It directs traffic and tells you when to go and when to stop and all that good stuff. So the client, the software will connect to the portal, get its rules. We call this the client config. Disconnect from the portal. Then it'll go to the different security processing nodes it has access to. It'll actually do an SSL hello to all of them. The first one to respond back, it'll connect to. That's the default behavior. We could prioritize and say, well, try this one first, and if that doesn't work, try this one, and then if that doesn't work, here's the third one. But the default is basically to connect based on proximity. Closest, the one that responds first is the best performing one. So that's the one you want to connect to. I mentioned earlier, you deploy the different locations based upon the locations where your users are. Now, it doesn't matter if you have lots of users concentrated in one area and just a few users in another area. You can do locations for both. Prism Access for mobile users, these mobile user SPNs, will automatically scale to meet the number of users in a particular location. Basically, what we'll do is we will continue to deploy and cluster together multiple nodes, multiple security processing nodes to meet demand. This is automatically done. There's nothing that has to be configured to make this happen. There's no cost involved in this. So if I have a situation where I've got, 10,000 users on the East Coast in New York and 10,000 users in the Bay Area on the West Coast and 100 users in Dallas, I could deploy mobile user SPNs in all three places. And I may have a really large cluster on the East Coast and West Coast, and maybe just a pair in Dallas if it's a really small user base. Prism Access takes care of all that in the cloud. And if you have a situation where, maybe you've got a big conference and everybody's meeting in Las Vegas, and all of a sudden the location closest to Vegas is totally swamped with a bunch of users that are coming in just for the week, we'll expand to meet the demand during that week. And then as we notice, well, we don't have nearly as many users anymore, we'll contract again. And all of that auto scaling is automatic, done on demand, no cost, no configuration. We have templates, just like we do for all the other pieces of Prism Access, that are pre-created. You just got to make sure you are concentrating on the correct ones. You need to make sure that you are looking at your mobile user templates. There's a pull down, and if you have the remote network solution, I'll have a template for remote networks. If you're doing the service connection, you'll have one for those. So make sure you're viewing the correct one. And there's going to be portal and gateway templates that are pretty much predefined, preloaded with many settings, but there are a few options here. So I wanted to go through those first. So with the portal, remember the traffic cop, the gateway, that's the MUSPN. It still uses the old nomenclature of the on-prem firewalls, or calls them gateways. The new marketing term is the MUSPN for Prism Access. So we'll go through the portal first. If you've ever deployed Prism Access, if you've ever deployed GlobalProtect with on-prem firewalls or physical firewalls outside of Prism Access, I should say, with customer-owned equipment, it's a pretty involved process. It takes hundreds of steps. With these pre-created templates that we use in Prism Access, it reduces the workload like 90% here. It becomes much easier. So we'll click on the portal within the mobile user template. And across the left-hand side here, we've got a bunch of different tabs: general, authentication, portal data collection, agent, clientless, VPN, satellite. We're going to be concentrating on the ones we're going to be using in a normal Prism Access for mobile user solution. Clientless, VPN, satellite, they actually encompass different solutions that we're not going to be talking about today. So in the general tab, you're going to give it a name. There are some default login pages and landing pages and things like that that can be turned on or off. Here within Palo Alto Networks, you connect, you fire up your laptop or workstation, you connect to GlobalProtect. You don't even see it. If you ever use the old GlobalProtect, we sort of have a legacy portals and gateways in our different offices here in the US. Connect to the old one, you will get a landing page that says like, welcome to GlobalProtect. But if you're using Prism Access, you connect to the gateway there, or an MUSPN. You never see it, it's all in the background. But you can have help pages or welcome pages or things like that if you want to. The next tab is the authentication tab. Those authentication profiles that we created, or authentication sequence, this is where we put that. There's a default one already created where all you do is add your authentication profile to it, and everything else is already filled out. Yeah, and you can add multiple ones because you may have multiple different ways for different user bases to authenticate. The next tab we're going to use is the agent tab. So we can have, I was telling you that the client will connect to, or the agent will connect to the portal, and the portal will send it information, rules, configs, client configs. Well, this is where we set up those rules. Things like for this group of users, are they going to be able to disconnect or not? To disable the GlobalProtect app? Allow? No. Are they going to be able to update this themselves to a new app GlobalProtect version, or will we do it in the background? Can users sign out, or do we want to use single sign-on? Lots of different settings here. There's a whole list of them. They're all pre-configured with popular settings that would be that are used by the great majority of our customer base, but those can be changed. And you can have different settings for different different user bases, different operating systems, different LDAP groups, whatever the case may be. And the last tab there is the HIP data collection, the host inspection, or I'm sorry, host information profiles. We collect HIP data by default with Prisma Access for mobile users. For the on-premise GlobalProtect solution on firewalls, it's a subscription and a license. Here it's included. We can exclude certain categories. There's a whole list of different categories that we do collect information on. You'll see that in a few slides. And we can exclude different categories. We can even create custom checks to check stuff that isn't checked normally. We could turn it off if we wanted to, but it's turned on by default. Now we go move to the gateways. So the gateways, again, have a lot of pre-configured stuff, names, locations, network settings, all that sort of stuff. Basically everything on the general tab, it's already pre-filled, read-only. The authentication tab, you'd put in your authentication profiles, probably the same one we use for the portal, but it is possible to have two different profiles with two different authentication types. Oops. Next, under the agent tab, IPsec tunneling will be enabled by default. Pretty much everything else is already filled out. We're not really going to use the satellite tab. That's for a different solution. So we're done. Now, the next step, or the next thing we need to do is go ahead and we need to make sure everything's correct. We didn't make any mistakes. Then we're going to commit this. Now, when you commit to Prisma Access, there's an option just to commit to Panorama, an option to push to devices, then there's a commit and push, a third option. Use that third option. Best practice here is just push the category of settings you're going to send. So in this case, everything we did dealt with our mobile user solution. That's the only piece we want to push. If we push empty sets of, say, remote network or service setup settings, it could cause some false positive errors. Then we have to track them down and fix them. So best practice is one component at a time, configure one component at a time, push one at a time. push it up to GlobalProtect. I mean to Prism Access, I'm sorry. There's a monitor tab. When we go into the Panorama tab, we were just in Cloud Services configuration earlier. Now we move up to status, and under status, there's a nice map that we'll see in a minute that shows you the overall status, but there's a monitor tab. In the monitor tab, we can watch all of the different MUSPNs, all the different security processing nodes, those different locations spin up. Now it doesn't show you the portal. The portal is going to be in that first location that you chose, and there's only one portal that the customer needs. They don't need multiple ones. There's no support for multiple ones. Now, having said that, everything that deploys with Prism Access is in HA pairs. There's nothing the customer has to do in order to configure that. So one pair of portals is all you need. You'll be able to see the security processing nodes spin up. Well, you won't see the portal. So usually once you see green checks here saying that your locations are up, you need to give a few more minutes, maybe up to 15 minutes for the portal to come up. How do you know when the portal comes up? Well, easiest thing to do is browse to it. Remember, you set up a host name for the portal, portal.company.com or whatever it is. Open a browser and go to it. And either you'll get no response, which means, hey, the portal's not even close to done yet, or you may get an error page just like this. And if you do, hey, we're close. The DNS record's set up. The virtual machine is deploying. It's just not done yet. So it may take another 5, 10, 15 minutes. But if you get this error message when you browse to it, that's a good sign, actually. That means you're almost done. Try again 5 minutes later. Try again 5 minutes later, and then 5, 10, 15 minutes, you'll be able to get to the portal. And you'd see that page where you can download the GlobalProtect client. And that'll tell you, yeah, okay, I'm okay. The status page I was saying earlier, the monitor is the map, the status page is the overall status. On green lights. If there are red lights, you can troubleshoot and find out what's going on. So if there's a red light, I would usually go back to the monitor tab. I would see where this red light is, the status error is. You simply click on it. It will open up a menu, and they'll tell you what's going on. Let's just give you high level information as to what's going on. Hey, this piece is wrong, or that piece is wrong, or there was an error during deployment, or a validation error, or whatever the problem might be. Also have the ability to see who's connected to the different locations, the different MUSPNs. And you can actually click on the numbers and it will show you the individual connections. You can even terminate a connection if you need to. We also have in the user ID logs all of the users that are on there. We also have GlobalProtect logs for everybody that's connected to GlobalProtect. But GlobalProtect's actually its own self-contained user ID function. So everybody connected to GlobalProtect is going to show up there. Also in the GlobalProtect logs, which are right above the square there, we'll be able to see users connecting to GlobalProtect, successfully connecting, users disconnecting, users problem connecting. That's our troubleshooting for GlobalProtect once it's up and running. Also in our ACC, Application Command Center, we've got some new reports or widgets for GlobalProtect, where we have a dashboard where you can see successful and unsuccessful connections. You can click on these different reports. You can drill down into them and get to the logs to see what the problem is. Gives you great visibility into connection failures, who couldn't connect and why they couldn't connect and things like that. So it really helps you troubleshoot the reasons why. So it's a great troubleshooting tool, the ACC for GlobalProtect. It's also a GlobalProtect activity tab or reports in the ACC, which gives you lots of great reporting. All the different operating systems, different GlobalProtect app versions that are being used, authentication methods that people are using. If you have multiple different authentication methods, how many people are using, GlobalProtect on mobile devices versus physical devices, and Windows versus Macs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's lots of great information gathering and troubleshooting tools just built into the normal deployments of GlobalProtect, our logs for GlobalProtect, and the ACC. So next, let's talk about the host information profiles. As I mentioned, we gather HIP information automatically with Prism Access for mobile users. If we want to use that information, we have to create host information profiles to say what information we want to track. And the idea is we can then use these profiles and add these to security policy rules for allows and denies. So for instance, I may want to, and in this scenario, say that all of my users need to have antivirus on their systems, and it needs to have been updated within the last 7 days, and I need to have scanned in the last 24 hours. Now I can put the vendors that we support. I just chose Bitdefender here. It's kind of at the top of the list. I could have chosen multiple different ones. But you can see all the different families of information we can look at. Patching, for Microsoft updates, personal firewalls, anti-malware, or spyware, or antivirus. It all falls under anti-malware. Have they done a disk backup? Are they using disk encryption? All kinds of stuff like that. Custom checks. So I can choose what it is I want to check. And what I said here is I want to make sure that it is installed, and the last version, the last database has been updated in the last week, and done a scan in the last 24 hours. So that's what I want to check, and I do that under HIP objects. Now, this is information we would have gathered automatically, but now I'm going to leverage this and use this. So I'm going to create a rule that says, look, if you don't meet these requirements, you're going to hit a deny rule. I'm not going to let you in, or I'm not going to let you get to whatever resource where you're trying to get to. Next thing I'll go is right below there to HIP objects, HIP policies, and a profile, and I'm going to say antivirus or not antivirus, so I can negate this rule. But what I'm saying here is you do need to meet this requirement. And I called it my HIP profile. Now, in my security policy rule, I'm saying, all right, anybody coming from the internet, here's my antivirus profile. And I said, if you don't have antivirus, then I'm going to have an action to deny. So I took that information that we collect. Everything's collected, or you can set rules on the portal to limit what you collect. It's reported to the gateway. Took that information, created an object that said, I want to look at this particular thing, or it could be multiple things, add them to a profile, and add that profile to my security policy rule to say, you do have to meet this requirement, or maybe I want to describe something that I don't want to see. Like if I see a registry value that indicates you have malware, well, then I do not want to see that. If I do see that, then I need to block you. If I don't see it, then I allow you. So you can do negative or negate things. There it is. Your best practices for deploying GlobalProtect with Prism Access and leveraging that host information